Wyoming Territory, January 1883. A fierce gale roared across the vast plains, and by the time Preston Rurk swung open the barn door that morning, snow had piled nearly halfway up the walls. He stepped inside, his boots grinding against the icy straw, the horses shifting, their breath steaming from their muzzles. He was halfway to the gear room when he spotted her huddled under a tattered woolen shawl, trembling beside a corroded grain barrel. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and glossy, her lips quivering. "Ma'am," he said, his tone steady though his hand drifted to the pistol on his hip. She flinched but stayed still. "Please, I'm not here to rob you," she said. Preston took a step nearer. "You're freezing to death." "I know," she murmured. He knelt beside her, gently pulling back the shawl just enough to see her face. Grime streaked her cheek. Her hair matted and wind-tossed, the shade of ripened wheat. She seemed no older than 25. "Can you walk?" She gave a faint nod. Preston slipped an arm around her shoulders, lifting her. She was feather-light, leaning into him as if utterly spent. He led her to the house, the chill biting through his coat. Inside, he stoked the fire higher and draped her in blankets from the bed. She sat in the rocking chair, silent, her teeth chattering. He poured coffee, handing her the mug. Her hands trembled too much to hold it steady, so he knelt, steadying it for her. "Name's Preston Rurk," he said. "You got one?" "Glenna," she whispered. "Glenna Sutter." He nodded. "Where'd you come from?" Her eyes welled, and she turned away. "I walked 2 days. The man I wed abandoned me outside Cheyenne, took the wagon, said I was too much trouble, and left." Preston stayed silent. The fire crackled. Glenna wiped her nose with her hands back. "I was trying to reach Fort Laramie. Heard there might be jobs." "You wouldn't have made it in this cold," Preston said. "You'd have died out there." "I know," she said again, her voice breaking. He stood, fetched a bowl of stew from the stove. "Eat, then sleep. We'll talk later." She nodded, taking the spoon he offered. Preston watched from across the room as she ate slowly, as if her stomach doubted the food's reality. When she finished, he gave her the bed and took the rocker. By nightfall, the storm had intensified, wind clawing at the windows, but the house was warm. Glenna slept beneath a heap of blankets, her breathing steady for the first time since he'd found her. Preston sat by the fire, gazing into the flames. He hadn't wanted a wife, didn't need anyone relying on him, not after the war, not after the land claimed his brother and fever took his mother. He came here to be alone. But she'd been freezing by his barn, and he'd done more than offer warmth. He'd let her in. The next morning, Glenna stirred slowly, blinking at the ceiling. "You slept near 14 hours, Preston said, handing her a cup of broth. She sipped it, her hands steadier now. "You saved my life." He shrugged. "Would have been wrong to leave you out there." When she tried to stand, he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "You're not going anywhere yet. Storm's still raging, and you're not strong enough. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." Her eyes welled again, but she blinked the tears away. They spent the day quietly. Preston worked on the barn roof during a lull in the wind. Glenna stayed by the stove, mending a torn seam on her skirt with thread from a drawer. That night, she helped peel potatoes for supper. "I can work," she said over the knife's soft thumb. "I can cook, clean. I'm no stranger to hardship." "I believe you," Preston said. "But you don't owe me anything." "Glenna." She looked up, her gaze steady. "I want to earn my place." He paused, then nodded. "All right." Days passed. Glenna grew stronger, baking bread, mending shirts, cleaning the root cellar. She didn't pry into his past, and he didn't ask about hers. But sometimes she smiled, and when she did, something stirred deep in his chest. One night after supper, she stood by the window, arms crossed. "I didn't think I'd survive that," she said softly. Preston looked up from the stove. "You're safe now." She turned. "You don't know what that means." He walked over, standing beside her. "I think I do." She looked up at him, and when her hand brushed his, he didn't pull away. "You never meant to have someone here, did you?" she asked. "No," he said. "I never wanted a wife." She nodded, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "But," he added, "then I found you freezing by my barn." Her eyes met his, wide and searching. "And I offered more than warmth," he said. She stepped closer, her hand sliding into his, holding tight. "Then let me stay." His voice was rough. "I want you to." The wind howled outside, but inside, the house was steady and warm, and for the first time in years, so was Preston's heart. By mid-February, the worst of the cold had eased. Snow still clung in patches on the butte's north side, and mud gripped Preston's boots as he hauled water from the creek, but the mornings no longer stung his skin raw. Glenna took to walking the fence line with quiet focus, checking for sagging wires strained by winter. She carried oversized leather gloves and a coil of wire she twisted herself. One morning, Preston watched from the porch, arms crossed. He didn't offer help. She hadn't asked. She returned near noon, cheeks flushed from wind and sun. "East pasture's solid. South side needs fixing." He nodded. "I'll ride out after dinner." "I can go." He stepped off the porch. "You've done enough today." She untied her scarf, tucking it into her coat pocket. "It's not about enough. It's what needs doing." He looked at her a long moment, then said, "I'll bring the tools. You carry the nails." They rode together in silence, she on his brother's old gelding, gentle and slow. The land stretched white and pale, broken only by the dark silhouettes of cottonwoods along the creek. She didn't fidget or fill the quiet with chatter, and he liked that. At the south fence, they worked side by side. She held the wire taut while he drove staples into the post. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. When they finished, she brushed dirt from her skirt and leaned against a post. "My father was a blacksmith," she said. "Taught me to file iron before I could write my name." Preston glanced at her. "That so? Skill keeps a person alive longer than beauty ever could." He rested his hand on the fence rail, thumb tracing a knot in the wood. "Ever think you'd end up out here?" "No," she said. "But I'm not sorry I did." He didn't answer. The wind tugged his hat, and a hawk's sharp cry echoed behind them. They rode back slower, the sun low by the time they reached the house. Glenna slid from the saddle, stiff but uncomplaining, leading the horse to the barn. Preston caught her elbow. "Come inside first. I made stew. It'll be cold if we wait." She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the table lamp cast a soft golden glow. The stew was thick with barley and dried beans from the cellar. Glenna ate quietly, her gaze drifting to the window where dusk pressed close. After the meal, she cleared the dishes. Preston filled the kettle without being asked. When she turned to thank him, her eyes lingered on his face a moment longer than needed. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He folded a dishcloth precisely. "I talk when there's something worth saying." She gave a small nod. "I used to fill silence to keep people from asking questions." He looked at her. "You don't have to do that here." She didn't answer, but when she handed him the last plate, her fingers brushed his, and she didn't pull away. That night, she didn't take the bed. She brought her blanket to the rocker, arranged it carefully, and sat watching the fire dwindle. Preston stood in the doorway, arms loose. "You can have the bed. I'll take the rocker tonight." "I'm not sleeping in your bed while you take the chair." "I've done worse," he said, "in worse company." She held his gaze. "You said you never wanted a wife." "I did." "Do you still feel that way?" He didn't answer for a long time, then said, "I don't know what I feel, Glenna, but I know I don't want you cold again." "Not ever." She stood slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "Then let's make a place where neither of us is." Preston didn't move, but something in his chest eased. He reached out, and she stepped into his arms, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. March brought thawing earth and the first signs of life pushing through the hard soil. A cluster of wild crocus bloomed near the well, pale purple and stubborn. Glenna bent to touch the petals one morning, her fingers gentle. Preston watched from the barn door, a bridle over his shoulder, the scent of warm earth and old wood around him. That evening, Glenna stood in the lean-to, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing grime from a battered tin kettle. Her hands were red from cold water, but she worked with purpose. "You always keep to chores, even when no one's watching?" Preston asked, stepping inside with a coil of rope over his arm. She didn't look up. "I think better when my hands are busy." "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, rinsed the kettle, and set it on the shelf. "There's a letter I never sent to my sister in Missouri. I wanted to tell her I was all right, but I didn't know where I'd be." "You want to write her now?" "I want to believe I've got something worth telling." His voice stayed even. "You do." Glenna met his eyes. "You don't say things unless you mean them, do you?" "I don't see the use in that." She dried her hands on her apron. "Then I'll write her tomorrow, if that's all right." "It's your story to tell." Later, he found her at the table's corner, candlelight flickering across her brow as she wrote slowly, the pen's scratches deliberate. He didn't interrupt, adding wood to the stove and settling on the bench, watching firelight shift across the floorboards. The next day, Glenna handed him the letter, folded and sealed with wax. "If you're headed past the trading post, you could leave it with the clerk. They've got riders going east. I'll take it in the morning." She nodded, hands clasped. "I don't know what she'll think. We haven't spoken since I left home." "You're not the same woman who left," he said. "That might be a good thing." Glenna stepped onto the porch as a gust caught her skirt. "I'm still learning who I am now." Preston leaned against the doorframe. "I reckon we both are." That night, a coyote's long, low call echoed from the ridge. Glenna sat by the hearth, stitching a patch into her coat's lining. She didn't speak until the thread was nearly gone. "What did you want before you came out here?" He considered before answering. "Quiet. Enough land to work with my own hands. No one to answer to." She nodded. "And now?" He set down the poker. "Now I want someone to greet the day beside me, not just pass through it." She set the needle aside. "I never thought I'd have that either, but I want it." Preston crossed the room and knelt beside her. "You still see yourself leaving?" "No," she said. "I see myself building something here." He took her hand, her fingers closed around his, strong and certain. They rose together before dawn. Glenna mixed cornmeal while Preston hitched the wagon. The letter rested in his coat pocket, warm against his chest. "I'll be back before dark," he said. "I'll have supper waiting." He paused, one boot on the wagon step. "You're not just passing through anymore." "I never meant to stay," she said, "but I'm glad I did." He tipped his hat and climbed up. As the wagon rolled toward the horizon, the rising sun caught the roofline, casting long light across the porch where Glenna stood. For the first time in years, both had something to return to. By late March, the ground was soft enough for planting. Preston turned the soil behind the mule, the plow's handle digging into his palms. Glenna walked behind, dropping seeds into the furrows: beans, cabbage, a few rows of beets. She moved with quiet focus, braid tucked into her shirt collar, the sun catching fine hairs at her temple. They didn't speak much, but something passed in the rhythm of their shared labor, wordless but certain. After the last row was pressed and watered, Glenna wiped her brow with her sleeve and looked toward the western hills. "I used to think Missouri was the whole world," she said. Preston leaned on the plow. "What changed your mind?" "Walking. Hunger. A man who promised things he never meant to keep." He didn't look away. "You trust me more than you trusted him?" "I already have," she said, "and it's held." That evening, Preston brought down an old wooden box from the loft, its corners worn smooth. He set it on the table and opened it without ceremony. "These were my father's," he said, laying out tools, rasp, hoof knife, all clean, wrapped in oiled cloth. Glenna reached for the file. "You kept them well." "I thought I'd pass them on, but there was never anyone to give them to." She set the file back. "There is now." His gaze lingered on her face, something shifting in his chest, slow, like a stone settling in a creek. The next morning, they rode east to the land pasture, Glenna balancing a sack of oats across her lap, back straight, reins loose. The air hinted at coming warmth. Birds darting between fence posts, the ground soft and damp under hooves. At the pasture's edge, Glenna slowed her horse and pointed to a stand of cottonwoods by the bank. "There's a shape moving in the trees." Preston dismounted, rifle in hand, and walked ahead, boots sinking in wet grass. A minute later, he called back, "It's a dog, starved near to death." Glenna joined him. The animal crouched low, ribs stark beneath its hide, one ear torn. It didn't growl, just watched, eyes flat with exhaustion. She knelt. "He's not wild." "No," Preston said, "but he's been left." Glenna rested her hand on her thigh, not reaching out. "Let's see if he follows." They turned back to the horses. After a few yards, the dog rose on shaky legs and limped behind. By afternoon, it slept beneath the porch, belly full, sides rising slowly. Glenna stood above, arms folded. "He reminds me of how I felt when you found me." Preston stood beside her. "You're not that woman anymore." "No," she agreed, "but I remember her." Inside, she warmed water and scrubbed dirt from the rag rug by the door. Preston watched her wring out the cloth, her jaw set with quiet resolve. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the land past the creek. There's space to build something more, a room with a window, maybe a porch facing west." Glenna looked up. "Why?" He scratched his neck. "Because if you're staying, I don't want you to feel you're only borrowing space." She stood slowly. "I want to build it with you." He nodded. "Then we'll start after the last frost." That night, she drew the curtain across the window and turned toward the bed. Preston had banked the fire, bare feet on the wooden floor. She stepped close, laying her palm flat against his chest. "I've never known a man to ask nothing and offer more than he says." He covered her hand with his. "I never knew I had more to offer till I met you." The wind had quieted outside, the air inside thick with the scent of tilled earth and pine smoke. Glenna leaned into him, and he held her without hesitation. In that quiet, they made a vow without words, not in ceremony but in the simple act of staying. April brought true warmth. The snowmelt swelled the creek, and the cottonwoods leafed out in pale, trembling green. Preston and Glenna began clearing the plot beyond the creek for the new building. The ground was matted with old roots and tough reeds, but she worked beside him with quiet tenacity, sleeves pushed high, hands blistered but steady. One afternoon, while digging post holes for the foundation, Glenna paused, leaning on the shovel. "You think about children?" she asked, eyes on their steady change. "System." "The sky." Preston wiped sweat from his brow. "I used to think I wouldn't bring anyone into this world, not the way it is." He looked at her, dirt-streaked and sun-warmed, standing on their cleared land. "Now I think a child raised in a home we built might grow up knowing how to stand firm." She nodded once and resumed digging. The question hung between them, not heavy, just waiting. By early May, the new room's frame stood, facing west as planned, with a wide window catching the day's last light. Glenna painted the trim with steady strokes, using deep red she'd picked at the trading post. Preston watched from the ladder, setting the final roof slats. "You always know what you want?" he asked. "I know what I won't settle for," she said, not looking up. The days grew longer. Glenna kept a cloth-bound ledger, noting the hens laying in the orchard tree's condition. She read by lamplight in the evenings, sometimes aloud if a chapter struck her. Preston listened, oiling tools or mending gear, her words curling around the room like hearth smoke. One night, he set his work aside. "I bought a ring," he said, not looking up. "Thought I'd ask you once the house was done." She closed the book in her lap, silent for a breath. "You don't need a finished house to ask me that." He met her gaze. "I didn't want it to feel like duty." "It wouldn't," she said. "Not for a second." He stood, pulled a small box from behind a sack of oats in the cupboard. Inside was a plain gold band, no stone, just solid, warm metal built to endure. He knelt beside her. "I want to marry you because you're the only thing I've ever been certain of." She reached for the ring, hands steady. "Then let's be certain together." He slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly. They went by the creek's edge, cottonwoods full, air thick with bees. The trading post preacher rode out, and the neighbor woman brought bread and boiled eggs. Glenna wore a dress she'd sewn from unbleached muslin. Preston trimmed his beard for the first time in months. Their vows were simple, spoken steady under the open sky. When it was done, Glenna rested her head on Preston's chest, his arm around her like it was habit. That evening, they sat on the new room's front step, watching the sun sink behind the butte, the dog, now thick-furred, lying at their feet. "I'm not sorry for any of it," Glenna said, fingers laced with his. "I wouldn't change a thing," Preston said. She leaned into his shoulder. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. They got us here." Her hand tightened on his, her breathing slow. He kissed her temple and stayed still. Weeks passed, then months. The crops came in late but strong. Glenna's ledger filled with neat lines and small triumphs. The first calf born easily, the day she caught a bee swarm in a spare crate, the moment she felt a stir beneath her ribs and knew its meaning. She told Preston one August evening as they walked the orchard path, the light low and golden, air heavy with cut grass. He stopped when she spoke, standing still. "Are you scared?" she asked, though her voice knew his answer. He looked at her, something deeper than pride in his eyes. "No, I'm ready." She smiled, taking his hand. "Then we'll raise them here, on land we built, and love them with all we've got." They stood in the orchard until the stars appeared, the dog circling their feet, the house glowing warm against the night. Years later, their son, with Glenna's eyes and Preston's quiet strength, ran through that orchard, his laughter ringing through the branches. Glenna called from the porch, flour on her apron, and Preston came in from the field to catch him mid-step, tossing him skyward. The house grew to hold their lives, more rooms, more stories, but its heart remained unchanged. Two people who found each other by chance and stayed by choice. Every night, no matter the season, Glenna lay beside Preston, her hand over his, the gold band worn smooth with time, knowing she was exactly where she belonged.